孙子，
孙子，
The Art of War. Summary Sun Tzu's The Art of War, also known as Sun Wu's Art of War, is the earliest military book known in China and the world's first military treatise. It is known as the scripture of military science and the first book of war. The art of war played an essential guiding role in ancient China's system of military education and the practice of war. It is not only a luminous treasure in China's military heritage, but also remains to this day the cornerstone of military wisdom handed down from ancient times. Sun Tzu. The original name of Sun Tzu is Sun Wu. He also had the Chinese courtesy name Chang Qing. Sun Tzu lived in Lai'an in Qi State, present-day Shandong, between BC 544 and BC 470. In his lifetime, he was famous as a military strategist and politician. As the founder of Eastern military science, Sun Tzu instructed the leaders of hundreds of armies. Because of this book, The Art of War, he was appointed general in the state of Wu, around modern-day Suzhou, and there, together with Wu Zixu, he led a successful military campaign against the state of Chu, now part of Henan province. He led his forces to 5 consecutive victories, defeating Chu's armies of 600,000 with only 30,000 soldiers. These outstanding achievements, gaining superiority against unequal odds to achieve more with less, have gone down in Chinese military history. Overview, Jiaxi Chapter 1. Hi, welcome to new video. Today we will unlock the art of war for you. If we consider war to be a feast of death, then military strategies and tactics are the philosophy of fighting for survival. They are experience and wisdom gained through bloodshed. Such plans and precision maneuvers not only concern the survival of a country, as success or failure on the battlefield determines a nation's future, but war also seals the fate of every individual. Whenever a war breaks out, lives are at stake, and that's why military tactics are of utmost importance. To understand the maneuvers on the battlefield, The Art of War is indispensable. It is the oldest book on military strategy, initiating this field of study. It provides essential guidance both to ancient Chinese military studies and modern warfare. Based on predecessors now lost, the book summarizes archaic principles and axioms relating to combat and further develops these into a system of military theory. Any reader opening the book will encounter a comprehensive description of the military methodology, from necessary preparation prior to the battle and the application of strategy in the field to the deployment, ordnance, and the study of your enemy. With the philosophy of dialectical materialism, The Art of War is regarded as the essence of early Chinese military thought. This book is a piece of esteemed Chinese cultural heritage, a jewel in the crown, and often hailed as the sacred book of military science, and the best book on military from ancient times. However, although this book's subject is war, it does not advocate conflict. Instead, Sun Tzu encourages leaders always to try peaceful means first and use force as a last resort, going into a war only when the other party was uncooperative. Sun Tzu believes that supreme excellence is not to win every battle, as the most effective action is breaking the enemy's resistance without needing to put up a fight. Moreover, he pointed out that some generals' excellent skill in waging war is not because they are born to be aggressive warriors, but because they understand how to secure favorable circumstances before the battle starts. On the other side, those destined to lose will be the first to plunge in with a display of their might and look for opportunities as an afterthought. For Sun Tzu, it is never wise to meet your enemy head-to-head in battle. Only by attacking an army's weaknesses and avoiding clashing against their advantages can a great commander use his troop maneuvers to work a triumphant miracle. These insights go some way to explain the enduring popularity of The Art of War. The book ranges far beyond military schemes and tricks, considering strategy at its highest level, where it becomes a wise philosophy for life. So to this day, the book continues to have great relevance. The Art of War is divided into 13 sections. For your ease, we have combined the parts into the following 4 chapters. These cover the main ideas in the book. Part 1. Military Strategies. Part 2. Military Tactics. Part 3. Armed Struggle. And Part 4. Environment. Military Strategies. Fight when you know you can win. Chapter 2. In this part, we will first look at the bigger picture in the preliminary discussion of strategy on the basis of the book's central idea that people should only fight with the certainty that they will win. The chapter mainly talks about two imperative pieces of advice: do not take risks and do not suffer losses. Let's first look into the first aspect. Do not take risks. Sun Tzu says in the book, "The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Hence it is a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected." With this in mind, Sun Tzu requires us to lay plans for every battle. Laying plans doesn't demand that you come up with any novel idea and catch your enemy off guard, but insists that you carry out a down-to-earth evaluation of both opposing parties. It's like a modern SWOT analysis that compares strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Doing this work tells us if circumstances are favorable and which party is certain to win. If we can be sure that we will have the last laugh, then it's time to wage war. Otherwise, we need to stay put. Sun Tzu lays out 5 elements that affect a war's outcome. They are morality, heaven, earth, leadership, and discipline. In this context, morality concerns popular commitment. All people should share one vision and have the same goals as that of the leadership. Heaven refers to natural phenomena, such as weather conditions, daylight and darkness, sun and rain, and cold and heat. Earth considers the terrain, land formations, and distances. Questions such as, is the battlefield far away from where we are now? Does the road wind through steep mountains or cross wide plains? The fourth element, leadership, reflects on a leader's capacities. Is the leader a great commander, decisive and brave? The last element, discipline, discusses all kinds of rules and regulations, including the marshaling of the army, the graduations of rank among the officers, and the maintenance of military supply chains. We can know the situations of the two parties in the conflict using these 5 aspects for our analysis. Which of the two leaders is fortified with moral strength? Which general has the best track record? Which side is more favored by the circumstances of heaven and earth? And which more rigorously enforces discipline? Which party is stronger? On which side are officers and soldiers better trained? And in which army is there the greater constancy in reward and punishment? With answers to these questions, we can have a better idea about who is likely to come out on top. Only when we are theoretically confident that we will have the upper hand in the battle should we go to war and fight it out with our enemy. This is the fundamental art of war. Briefly, in summary, it's important to analyze and compare your situation to your enemies and to be certain that you can win before putting a foot on the battlefield. However, when the war is underway, generals must take over and continue to be strategic. They must try every means to disadvantage their enemy and attack their weaknesses. Meeting the enemy head-to-head is never the best option. Sun Tzu promotes the strategy of confusion and deception. To confound the enemy on the battlefield, if you're ready for a fight, pretend you are not prepared. If you want to fight, pretend you don't. And if you want to fight nearby, pretend that a faraway place is preferable. If an enemy is greedy for the spoils of war, seduce them with the promise of riches, and when your enemy is disorientated and disorganized, seize the advantage and attack. When an enemy is confident, you should be on your guard and avoid a direct face-off. When the enemy's general is known to be irritable, harass them so they may act impulsively and thus make mistakes. If they despise you, fuel their arrogant attitude. If your enemy is well rested, get them on the run. If the enemy is united, try to fragment them. All of these ideas will help win the final battle. Whether it is plans laid in advance or the strategies on the battlefield, the goal is to up your chance of victory. To win, we need to throw stones at the enemy's eggs. Having an advantageous position will most likely secure a victory ultimately. Next, let's consider the second bit of advice: to avoid losses. Every battle is fought with the expectation of a gain, be it tangible, such as the capture of land, or intangible, such as affecting the enemy's confidence. However, war consumes resources and large sums of money. Soldiers are killed, and people are needed to staff hospitals, logistics, and transportation. An army needs spies and plenty of material supplies like food, weapons, and ammunition. All kinds of costs need to be taken into account to replenish vehicles and armaments. Money is also needed to buy bows and arrows, to pay for the transport of food to the front line, to entertain guests, and perhaps to bribe enemy soldiers for information. Only when a general is secure with these resources can they effectively and confidently lead their troops. But attention to sustaining supplies doesn't end here. It costs a fortune for troops to travel far, as when they move, they consume military supplies on the road. States with small national reserves will find it hard to support a long march and need to levy their citizens with high taxes. When this happens, people can become impoverished and are likely to cause domestic unrest. What is the way to avoid running out of funds in the midst of a military campaign? Sun Tzu advises that wise generals should steal from their enemies. Each kilogram of food looted from the enemy can help one save the cost of transporting 20 kilograms of food all the way from a supply center. A general who understands this point will encourage their soldiers to loot from the enemy, seizing food and weapons, but treating captives well, so they will have a favorable attitude and continue replenishing the invading force. This scheme can not only lower military costs, but also weaken the enemy. However, expecting to replenish supplies from around the battlefield is not a long-term solution. On the one hand, there's no guarantee of nourishing plunder. It depends very much on the conditions on the ground. With a prolonged war, inevitably, the landscape will be depleted. Armed forces waiting in reserve at home or stationed in other countries may seize an opportunity to attack a vulnerable home base. Conditions are likely to become increasingly unpredictable and ultimately altogether out of control as a nation attempts to fight battles both at home and abroad. To this threat, Sun Tzu responds by pointing out that speed is of utmost importance in a military operation. If we are stronger than the enemy, we need to conquer them quickly. A war that drags out offers no benefit. If we are inferior, we need to do the opposite. We must find every means to make the war last so that the enemy will be ground down. Scooping up replenishment to supplies on site and concluding the war as swiftly as possible is a way to minimize losses, but it is insufficient. Sun Tzu believes that breaking the enemy without fighting is the wisest strategy. Excellent strategists will first try to thwart their enemy using their intellect by making them suffer politically. If a reasoned approach is not working, the second best option is to fracture the enemy's resistance using diplomacy. And the worst option is resorting to force and putting cities under siege. The former strategies exchange low consumption of resources for maximum progress towards victory, a minimum input for an optimal result. Blindly throwing resources at an attack and killing the enemy's people is costly, with an additional moral cost. Such a victory comes at a high price and will yield little benefit. Sun Tzu also notes that even when the use of force is inevitable, we need to consider every possible way to avoid launching a frontal assault. Do not consider smashing down the city walls and killing all the people. Instead, overwhelm the whole city, keep it intact and undamaged, and then quickly and thoroughly tackle any remaining issues of dissent. If your force is 10 times the size of the enemy's, you should surround them. If it is 5 times, then attack them. If you are only twice as strong as your enemy, split them up into smaller forces. When you are equally matched, you can fight. When you are slightly the weaker of two, avoid a face-off. And when you are obviously and by all accounts in an inferior position, flee. There is no future for you in a fight. At this point, we concluded the first part concerning military strategies. Its message was to get into a fight only when you know you can win. The chapters outline 2 fundamental insights. They are, do not take risks and do not suffer losses unnecessarily. The most important thing for any army general preparing for the battlefield, intending to win a war, is to ensure that they are going into this erratic and dangerous environment in the most favorable circumstances. Also, generals must pay attention to loss control. If there's a lack of supplies, it is the general's responsibility to guarantee a means of getting replenishment to the front line. Sun Tzu advocates for a quick blitz. This short, sharp shock can be greatly advantageous and avert hefty costs to both sides, brought about by a prolonged conflict. A speedy resolution will ensure that a territory stays protected once the war is over. Most importantly, the wisest military strategist will always conquer their enemy without resorting to force. Military tactics. The recipes for deploying an army. Chapter 3. In this part, We are going to talk about disposition and relevant tactics from a theoretical perspective. Disposition can be considered as the recipe for military deployment. To be more precise, disposition relates to how a general evaluates the battlefield and commands troop deployment. The general must decide where to place more and fewer soldiers and how their movement will be managed. Disposition is divided into two aspects: visible and invisible dispositions. Visible disposition refers to military capacity flaunted before the enemy. To surpass an enemy using our visible disposition, we need to show that we are better than they are. The priority is improving our appearance of strength. Invisible disposition is immeasurable. It is under the surface. It is more about enticing an enemy to reveal their weaknesses so that we can overwhelm them with our advantages. To outrun your enemy in invisible disposition is a means of weakening them. The onus is on the enemy. Invisible and visible tactics are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. The control of both is indispensable for achieving victory. So let's first look at how to overcome our enemy in terms of visible disposition. To avoid defeat, we need favorable circumstances. Our primary position is to assess our strength and determine if our strength exceeds our enemy's. So how do we make it clear that we are better than our enemy in terms of military capacity? Sun Tzu lists 5 elements to consider in consecutive order. First, check how many lands each party controls. Do we have greater authority over territory than they do? Secondly, consider relatively how much food can be produced based on the area of land under each party's control. Third, calculate the number of troops ready for war. The quantity of soldiers heading for the battlefield can be deduced from the amount of food produced. Next, once we know the size of the force we are up against, we can compare military capacities. From this data, we can come to a conclusion about our chances of victory. More arable lands will promise a more extensive force of fit, battle-ready soldiers. When two parties meet on the battlefield, the one with the larger force has a better chance of victory. Visible disposition also involves the management of the army and how a leader commands. According to Sun Tzu, leaders must delegate responsibilities by designing an appropriate rank structure. A general needs to assign effective officers at different levels of command to manage the overwhelming number of people involved in an efficient fighting force, splitting them up into units. They must also establish a reliable signaling system, such as with flag waving or drummed rhythms, to coordinate troops and convey orders. There is no use in a general being competent if, on the battlefield, they cannot govern a force of thousands as efficiently as if they were managing a limited troop of soldiers. Only with well-conceived structures and strict systems can an armed struggle how to gain an advantage. Chapter 4. This part, Armed Struggle, is about the practical ways forces can achieve an advantage on the battlefield. Our focus will be on 3 points: gaining an advantageous position, espionage, and understanding your enemy's situation. First, let's talk about how to obtain an advantageous position. In the art of war, armed struggle refers to the conflicts of two parties on the battlefield, each striving for the upper hand. They both want to exploit the most favorable moment and location. A good time to strike could be when the enemy is exhausted and your forces are well rested and ready to go into battle at their ease. The best location could be a place where our troops can outflank their opponents, attacking the enemy's weak spots with our most powerful force. To gain the upper hand in an armed struggle is not easy. Sun Tzu says we need to make long distances near and make problems into advantages. What about making a long distance near? How do we do that? Sun Tzu indicates it is all about selecting the correct route in our march to the battlefield. An army's march is like a cross-country race, tramping over hill and dale, walking long distances. In such a scenario, the route is the most important factor. If we choose the most direct and shortest road, we will be sitting ducks for the enemy to intercept. If we choose a long and winding road, it will hinder backup operations. Evaluating these two options, we clearly need to choose a route that may be long and wandering, but is the most optimal. We also need to sell the route's advantages to our soldiers by giving them some hope of gain, making them eager and willing to march on. In motivating the soldiers on the march, we can cover a long distance, arrive earlier than our enemy, and have a good rest before facing them. Ideally, the enemy will arrive dog-tired and stumbling onto the battleground. As a result, we have earned a favorable circumstance. The next question is, how does an army turn problems turn into advantages? First, we need to strike a balance between how much equipment we carry and how fast we need to cover the ground. If we are going to take all our supplies with us, we are less likely to get to the battlefield ahead of our opponents. If we travel too light, we will lack equipment for the fight. So we need to balance these two requirements. It's not absolute. We must consider speed and coordination as connected, one with the other, when a large army is on the move. If the soldiers march at the fastest pace possible, some weary people will lag behind and the team's cohesion can risk falling apart. In these circumstances, the commander at the front of the line, without protection from the rear, is more likely to be captured. If the aim is for the whole army to arrive at the destination simultaneously, you need to maintain a slower pace. But this can impact the encounter with the enemy and any follow-up military operations. As a result, we need to balance speed and coordination. Environment. How terrain helps you win the war. Chapter 5. This part is also about practical matters and discusses the connection between different aspects of landscape and strategy. Sun Tzu defines marching, battles, and wars as the three levels of the army's relationship with the terrain. So let's start with the first level he mentions and how an army should use the terrain to help them march. When an army stops to pitch camp, they need to be aware of 4 types of terrain and pay attention to the differences between them. The first terrain is mountains. When pitching a camp in the mountains, you need to choose a place where it's easy for you to advance and where it's clear for a retreat. Also, when you are marching through mountains, follow a river. The river is the second type of terrain. When you choose to camp beside running water, it's crucial that you move a little back from the riverbank. There is always the danger that the water will rise and soldiers will drown. If the enemy attacks by wading towards you through the water, wait until they are in the middle of the stream, then trap them there to fight back. Also, do not deploy too near the water's edge or camp downstream. Your base wants to be on high ground and facing the sun. The third terrain is salt marsh. If your enemy spots you in slat marshes, it can spell trouble because the marshy terrain makes walking difficult. As a result, pass through as quickly as possible and do not tarry. If you have to stage a battle on salt marshes, ensure you stay in an area where there are water plants and keep your back to the trees. Plateau is the final type of terrain. On a level plateau, it is essential that you spread your troops out to occupy a large area. Make sure you are stationed on the higher ground with lower parts in front of you. In this way, you can observe your enemy's movement from a high vantage point and conveniently overwhelm them with your weapons raining down from above. In modern warfare, armies still value the supremacy of holding the high ground. Although today the highest point is in the sky, its strategic significance remains the same. Beyond these general terrains, there are 6 dangerous terrains a warrior should consider. These are impassable ravines, natural enclosures, natural prisons, natural traps, natural pitfalls, and clefts. Impassable ravines refer to the river that is between 2 steep, lofty mountains. Natural enclosures are lands surrounded by mountains. They look like a well with vertical sides. Natural prisons are surrounded by towering cliffs on 3 sides, welcoming you in there, but there is only one way out. Natural traps are places covered with such dense undergrowth that will trap you. Natural pitfalls are low-lying places heavy with mud. A chariot will get bogged down and cavalry will be stuck there. And the last one, a cleft, is an extremely narrow and difficult pathway between cliffs. The common characteristic of these 6 terrains is that they will envelop you. If you go deeper, the situation deeper. The Art of War Review, Chapter 6. That's today's content from The Art of War. In the section on military strategies, Sun Tzu emphasizes that we should not take risks and should not fight until we are certain of victory. He used the analogy that we must use stones to attack an opponent's eggs, deriving the maximum result from a minimal investment of our resources. If we can vanquish our enemy without resorting to force, that is the ideal. In the section on tactics, Sun Tzu explains visible and invisible dispositions. Winning through visible disposition requires constantly improved capacity, while winning at invisible disposition requires flexible tactics. The visible and the invisible mutually reinforce one another. In the armed struggle section, Sun Tzu mentions 3 ways to help gain the upper hand. Firstly, we need to win ourselves a favorable location and strike at the right time. But we also need information, and that is where spies come in to inform us about the enemy's intentions and vulnerabilities. The section on environment focused on the impact of terrain on a military campaign. Although strategies and tactics help us overcome an adversary, Sun Tzu warns us to be careful when contemplating going into a war. He believes wars are like fires. They flare up and spread out. We should be prudent and cautious. If there's no obvious benefit, do not start a fight. Do not order your soldiers to march if you are uncertain about whether you will win. When there are other choices, do not resort to force. Sun Tzu believes that commanding an army and maintaining national stability requires vigilance. The most successful war is settled before it starts.
孙子